For sure.
America's foreign policy is in the global spotlight this week as President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris make several high-profile stops around the world. As part of her first trip overseas since taking office, Vice President Harris is sitting down with Guatemala's president. The two are meeting right now and are expected to discuss the root causes of migration at the southern U.S. border, like poverty, corruption, and violence.
For more on this, let's bring in Ed O'Keefe. He is traveling with the vice president, and he is in Guatemala City. Ed, we watched your interview with the Guatemalan president. We've heard a bit of what the vice president of the United States said in her opening remarks. Take us through her trip so far and what she's hoping to accomplish.
Well, it began just a little while ago here at what they call the National Palace of Culture. Used to be where the leaders of Guatemala lived and worked, but now is more of a museum. They are going to be meeting for about 2 hours to hold their first face-to-face talks and essentially continue what have been virtual conversations so far about the root causes of the immigration crisis and how exactly both countries can respond to the record surge of migrants across the U.S.-Mexico border. This is Harris's first stop, first international trip since taking office in January. She made a point of acknowledging the fact that Guatemala is her first stop. She said it's a reflection of the Biden administration's concern and attention paid to Latin America and to the Western Hemisphere. She's supposed to go to Mexico later tonight for meetings tomorrow there as well. But by starting here, it's getting at what she described and what the Guatemalan president called during their public remarks a little earlier, ground zero, really, for the immigration crisis in the United States. Thousands of Guatemalan children detained each month at the border and in U.S. facilities before being either reunited with their families or sent back here.
Ed, we know that you spoke to Guatemala's president in a new interview. We played some of the sound earlier, and I guess it's sort of positive with a small p in that he acknowledged that they both agreed on one thing, that there's a problem, but the way to solve that problem, it seems like they're not really in agreement. What were your biggest takeaways from the conversation with him?
That there's definitely some distance between them on the how. As he said, we agree on the what, the fact that there's a problem, but the how to solve it is where there is some distance. The United States has, in recent weeks especially, started to amplify and express its concerns about corruption generally, not just here in Guatemala, but across the region, and now officially around the world. It's become a foreign policy priority for the administration. But they're coming head-to-head with it here in Guatemala first, a country with a history of dictatorships, of a long civil war, and of corruption that permeates across society, not just government, but business, and as the president pointed out as well, to some extent, yes, the nonprofit sector. So, you know, he's concerned that perhaps her focus on that is a bit misguided and should be focused on corruption generally across society, but also, more importantly, in his view, on drug traffickers and on human traffickers, or so-called coyotes. He's calling on the U.S. Congress to pass legislation that would stiffen penalties for coyotes, and he said he would gladly extradite more of them to the United States to face American charges, because that would be seen as a bigger deterrence than if they were to face charges either here or in El Salvador, Honduras, or Mexico. The other thing he's pushing for is more help with dealing with the drug trade, and he hinted at us that there would be an announcement today, we'll have to wait and see about this, of some kind of renewed partnership between the Justice Department in the United States and the various U.S. attorneys' offices across the country who may deal with drug cases or money laundering or other issues related to Latin America, and Guatemalan prosecutors to try to work together to deal with some of these issues, perhaps, again, coyotes, drug traffickers, and other issues. We'll see what that is. Administration officials have told us to expect some announcements today regarding anti-corruption efforts, other economic programs, perhaps, and the vice president very proud of the fact and has talked about that she gathered together a bunch of business leaders about 2 weeks ago at the White House to talk about how they're going to start investing more in this region, try to create jobs, but also make sure that their investment isn't just, you know, situated in a city like this, Guatemala City, but is actually spreading out across the country so that more working class people can benefit from international investment.
So, Ed, we know Vice President Harris is now heading to Mexico after she wraps up this trip. What are we expecting there?
Well, you know, meetings with Andrés Manuel López Obrador, a president who has been pretty explicit in his criticisms of the United States, not just during the Biden administration, but during the Trump administration. A president that is, you know, known to speak his mind in undiplomatic ways, and I think there's some intrigue and concern about what may go on tomorrow, especially given that there were just elections in Mexico yesterday, essentially their version of the midterm elections. The president's party held on to power, but he did lose some seats. So she's going in to Mexico later tonight to meet with the president, who's seen his political influence shrink ever so slightly, but notably just in the last 24 hours or so. There again, there's going to be conversations about ongoing cooperation on border security, concerns about drug trafficking, and we'll see what other issues get raised. But really, if you think about it, guys, again, important to note that this is her first trip overseas as vice president and the beginning of what you could call foreign policy week for the Biden administration. Between this trip to Latin America and the president's travels that begin later this week to Europe for the G7 meeting, to meet with Queen Elizabeth and the British Prime Minister, and then on to Belgium next week for the NATO summit, and that closely watched meeting in Geneva with the Russian president, we're hitting roughly the 5.5, 6 month mark, and the international travel is beginning as this administration says it's trying to reassert U.S. leadership around the world.
All right, Ed O'Keefe, thank you so much.
Take care.